Wait, what's this? Hi friends, I'm a bit tardy to the party, but GW recently revealed official Golden Girls, and let me tell you, I haven't seen the internet this mad at the letter S since some moron wore two of them to a tournament some time ago, and because of this retcon, the internet has been participating in the nerdiest version of the Blood games. And most of these arguments, I feel, they just kind of devolve into blind yelling contests, and they only really touch on very surface level points when, honestly, I feel like there is much more nuance to this issue. And so today I kind of just wanted to share my insights on the topic. And to me, I don't really care about the meta aspects of this issue. I'm only really looking at it from a lore and narrative point of view. And to reiterate, I'm no real source of authority. I'm just a regular nerd like the rest of the community. However, I do believe there are some important points that often get glossed over in these arguments. And I know by the time this video releases, the controversy will probably be forgotten and irrelevant. However, let's be honest, this stupid issue comes up every month, so let's just piss off some Redditors and talk about whether or not I think female Custodes are valid in lore. And after little to no build-up, personally, I think they're completely fine. And let me explain why. But first, we need to address female space marines. I know this issue gets talked about all the time ad nauseum, but in order to explain why I think female Custodes are fine, I feel like I need to touch on female Astartes. And I think the issue is much more nuanced than simple, ew, cuties, or whatever. And so first, I'll let you know, I'm in the camp that's against female space marines.
Yep, Crackduck officially hates women, and even worse, he hates boobies.
Don't get me wrong, I love boobs and tall power women and all that, whatever. However, the reason I'm against female space marines is because I feel like Marines being exclusively male is an interesting aspect of their lore, and it adds to the greater 40k storyline. Expanding on that, the lore implications of exclusively male Marines and the thematic value is more interesting to me than some Marines arbitrarily having a girl name instead of a boy name, and then making the kits maybe have like one or two girl heads.
Yep, Crackduck thinks women are uninteresting, and even worse, he hates boobies.
What do I mean by this though? I believe that the Adeptus Astartes being an all-male order leads to some interesting story beats and ideas for the greater 40k universe. So first, let's address one of the reasons Marines being an all-boys club is cool. Exclusively monogendered warriors and orders have been a trope in stories for a long time, simply because the idea is unique and cool. And this isn't just for men either. Things like the Amazonian warriors in Greek mythology or fish speakers in Dune, those are good examples of all-female warrior groups. Additionally, the Marines being all-male, it plays into the religious themes of the Imperium. Having Marines and Sisters of Battle be kind of like extreme warrior versions of the monastic monks and nuns is just kind of cool, and it adds flavor and theming to the Imperium. Another reason is that Marines have traditionally been all male in the proper 40k lore, and having female Space Marines would just kind of be an unnecessary retcon that would create some weird lore inconsistencies for little reason. And I know it gets brought up every time this dead horse is beaten, but GW contradicting the lore very often is not a valid argument for them contradicting the lore even more. Doing something poorly in the past doesn't really vindicate doing it more in the future. Retcons are generally poor writing choices, and most authors would try to minimize them. Having no respect for the lore at all cheapens the setting and makes it harder to get invested. With that being said, however, I don't believe the argument that, well, that's just the way it was and it should stay that way forever, is reason enough on its own. Sometimes retcons can be good if they enhance the story, improve the setting in some way, or add something cool enough.
Oh, so now Crackduck retconned his stance, and he thinks that female Space Marines are cool and a good idea. Boo! He also probably still hates boobies.
One example of a retcon adding a lot to a story and being an overall good change is Darth Vader. Despite what Mr. Lucas would have you believe, Vader was not meant to be Luke's father from the start. Vader being Luke's father directly goes against what was previously told to the audience. From the black and white, all retcons are bad perspective, that would be a very bad thing. However, it ended up being an excellent decision. And so why is that? Well, the reveal of Vader being Luke's father in Empire adds a ton to the saga. It deepens the characterization of Vader from turning him from a badass looking but otherwise one-note villain into a more complex figure who felt the darkness, and deep down he wants to be redeemed and he struggles with this. It also strengthens the conflict of the saga since now Luke has personal ties to the enemy, and it sets up the conflict of Return of the Jedi where Luke's solution to the movie is more complex than just killing a baddie. And finally, it was just an amazing story beat that became one of the most iconic plot twists in all of cinema. So let's take this retcon in contrast to female Space Marines. Female Space Marines narratively wouldn't really add anything to the story or setting. They wouldn't really change any existing relationships At least not more so than just the introduction of any other new female character from any of the other factions. The only thing they would really add is something cool. However, I think that they would take away a lot of cool elements from the story at the same time. Female Space Marines can be cool, but again, I don't think that they're cooler than the lore implications of exclusively male Marines. For example, Immortal Perpetual Heroes, those are cool. Elenius Pius being turned into one, that isn't cool because it detracts from the narrative. And I feel a similar way about female Space Marines in the way that it would detract from the lore more than it would add. So finally, let's get into the most important reason I'm against female Space Marines. I believe the implications that exclusively male Marines bring to the setting and the indirect characterization it does is excellent. Although to my knowledge has never outright been said, I believe the idea that one of the reasons the Emperor made the Astartes exclusively male in order to prevent them from becoming a master race who replaced humanity is very much implied, and is an extremely interesting aspect of the 40k storyline. Space Marines are superior to base humans in almost every single physical and mental front. Marines are impossibly stronger, faster, and even smarter in terms of mental processing than regular people. However, humanity has never been defined by our physical traits. Some of the key strengths of humanity is our drive and, well, our humanity. Although 40k humans in general are very callous and cruel, they still exhibit these traits in a wacko 40k way. The Emperor, despite his flaws, I mean his perfection, ultimately only cared about humanity surviving and prospering in the galaxy. He went through these extreme lengths in order for humanity to survive, and he values that above all else. Although flawed, the Emperor's ultimate goal was to control the galaxy, lead humanity to their peak, and then allow them to rule themselves. During the Great Crusade, the Emperor made it clear that he did not want him, his Primarchs, or anyone other than normal humans to rule the Imperium. Him taking control and creating his transhuman sons and armies was simply just a means to an end to him. Due to this, it could be reasonably inferred that he would take any means necessary to ensure that the Astartes or Primarchs would not be able to replace humanity. The Emperor did not fully trust them, and rightfully so, considering that they have a traitor rate of about 50% after all, so it makes perfect sense that he built multiple failsafes into the Astartes to prevent them from threatening human dominance. One such measure would be making them all male as to minimize the possibility of a miraculous case of reproduction and a self-sustaining transhuman population. Now, some would argue that Marines are already sterile and they could just be castrated for this reason, and that would allow female Space Marines. But what's easier to do, rewriting a near godlike level genius's engineering work and creating a new breed of Astartes, or cutting off some dude's balls? Plus, it's not unlike the Emperor to have multiple redundancies. The Astartes making process being tied to the Y chromosome and being completely incompatible with female aspirants is not only a redundancy, but it also makes sense as a more secure failsafe. It took one of the smartest people in the setting 10,000 years to make slightly taller Marines with a few more organs, so to alter the gene seed in a way to accept females would likely take a lot longer than finding a method to create Astartes without the insane radiation and castration process. Another benefit of this that is less directly stated is that, from this point of view, the Astartes are basically a subspecies of human that are wholly incapable of reproduction. This makes it so that even the meanest Space Marines have to care about humanity to an extent, since they rely on them to make more Marines. This again creates interesting story potential where chapters have more of a reason to protect their human populations, and it kind of opens the door for some conflicts where perhaps a Marine chapter feels superior to humanity and hates them, but they have to protect them because otherwise they just can't sustain their numbers. Something like that, you know? With that in mind, let's discuss some arguments for female Astartes and what they would actually add to the setting. The three main arguments I see pro-female Astartes people making are for representation, some lore reasons, and simply because it would be cool. So first off on that list is female representation. I believe that representation is important. However, I don't think that Marines being exclusively male makes it so that 40k is inherently non-inclusive. As I previously stated, I believe that monogendered orders can be a pretty interesting trope and their mere existence isn't inherently non-inclusive. In fact, I would argue that 40k actually has some pretty good potential for female representation in factions. Most factions have pretty much perfect gender equality, things like Guard and Eldar, they can have cool and interesting female characters. And then there's of course the exclusively female factions like the Sisters of Battle and Sisters of Silence. To me, if there was an issue with representation, it wouldn't inherently be about the Space Marines. The issue is that there aren't enough stories for exclusively female factions. In fact, there's an argument that there aren't enough stories for any factions other than Space Marines, which also hampers female representation, as the co-ed factions don't get as much spotlight. So, the issue would likely get even worse with the addition of female Space Marines, as the Sisters of Battle would be less special and likely get even more ignored, and female characters from other factions also wouldn't be as prominent. In the long run, I believe it would be more beneficial for the other factions to get more lore. If female Space Marines are added, it's very likely they'd get like one or two named female Marines, and then we get one book, and then the Marines continue to get the bulk of the stories, and nothing really changes overall. On the other hand, if the root of the issue was addressed and the Sisters of Battle or any of the other factions got more stories, then there's more potential for female representation, and since they're getting more books in these factions, there's a platform for introducing new and interesting female characters. To me, I just feel like there are so many more interesting and better ways to add more female representation to the setting, and adding female Space Marines would just be kind of a lazy way to go about it. Next, as for lore reasons, I've seen two somewhat prominent ones. The first is that Space Marines would benefit from a larger recruiting pool. I disagree with this argument. Space Marines already have billions of aspirants and entire plans to pull from. The ratio of Marines to normal humans is so little that they definitely have enough aspirants, even when cutting the pool in half. The Marine population is bottlenecked by the limited gene seed, not lacking aspirants. And a counter argument I saw when perusing the warp was that even if they have an excess of aspirants, they'd potentially be missing out on some good candidates from barring women. While this is technically true, the sample size of Astartes aspirants is just so large that it's unlikely that a difference in skill or ability would really be significant in these upper echelons. So the small benefit of a wider recruitment pool doesn't really outweigh the cost of the Marines potentially trying to replace humanity. Now, another lore reason I saw getting brought up a lot was that the gene seed has been altered by Call, so the lore supports the idea that it could be further altered in order to allow female aspirants. And this argument honestly also doesn't really make much sense to me. It took Call 10,000 years to make the Primaris project, and it doesn't really make much sense lore or character-wise for Call to make female Marines, because it would be a relative waste of time and resources. Practically, female Space Marines would be almost exactly the same as male Marines after all the procedures done to make a Space Marine. Additionally, even though Call breaks the rules occasionally, he would only really do it if it benefited him or the Imperium in some way. Creating Space Marines that were female is not really in his best interest, since it would go against the Emperor and potentially threaten humanity's existence. And lastly would be aesthetics. I think that aesthetics are very important, and I've always subscribed to the idea of the rule of cool. However, kid bashing female Marines is like the easiest thing in the entire world. So if it's your aesthetic, you could totally do it without GW contradicting the lore with official models. Plus, it's my belief that female Space Marines wouldn't look really that much different from male Space Marines. Even the guardsmen, where they have less armor and no gene enhancement, don't really have any like clear gender differences in the models, so official female Astartes would literally just be head swaps. And with that, why do I think female Custodes are fine and make sense? Well, simply because none of the reasons I have against female Space Marines would apply to the Custodes. The only reason I'd be slightly against it is because, honestly, the retcon was handled kind of poorly. And another small reason would be that the Sisters of Silence and Custodes have the gender duality thing, which I thought was kind of cool. However, they have two very different roles anyways, and the Marines and Sisters of Battle do the trope much better in my opinion. And so the real kicker for the side of female Custodes is that the process of making them is far more exact and precise than making a Space Marine. The Space Marines are basically the easy bake oven of the gourmet Custodes. The purpose of the Space Marines is to be the quote-unquote easy to make mass-produced super soldiers who are fit for large crusading armies, and Custodes on the other hand were works of art made to be near-perfect warriors and beings, serving as the Emperor's bodyguards, advisors, and confidants. During infancy, Custodes is basically remade from the ground up to be a perfect guardian and servant of the Emperor. They're said to be altered so deeply that even their soul is affected. This means that they're wholly loyal and dedicated to the Emperor, with little to no free will against him. This is important because even though the Custodes are basically a super mega master race, the Emperor trusts them to never go against his plans because, as far as we know, they literally can't. This means that he can make male and female Custodes without worrying about them replacing humanity. Due to this fact, unlike female Astartes, I don't think that the female Custodes really contradict any big lore things, at least none that I know about. But if you know more about this, feel free to let me know in the comics. I acknowledge I don't know every single detail of lore. With the addition of female Custodes, nothing is really lost as far as I know, and I actually believe that it strengthens the story aspects that exclusively male Marines bring. It also demonstrates the Emperor's deep trust of Custodes while providing deeper contrast between the Emperor's transhuman forces. In that way, I actually believe it's a very good medium between both sides in the argument. Anti-female Astartes folk get to keep the cool lore regarding why Space Marines are exclusively male, and then the pro-female Marine people get to have cool super soldier chicks and more Imperial representation. But that's just what I think on the matter. I feel in arguments it seems to just boil down to very basic points that don't really address what I find important. As a mega nerd, I find the lore and narrative reasons to be infinitely more important and interesting than the other common talking points. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. If you know something I don't and female custodians actually do contradict some lore thing, maybe you think that my points are completely stupid and female marines should be a thing, or maybe there's other stuff I missed. Whatever you think, comment below, and please keep it civil. And just remember, the internet is basically fake. The vast majority of people aren't actually that heated over this issue and are much more reasonable than the people who are arguing on Reddit and Twitter. And as always, if you like this video, please like, subscribe, and consider sharing with others. Thank you.